Hello, and welcome to the Urban Classroom. Hi, my name is Mrs. Briggs, and I want to thank you for joining me today in the Urban Classroom. Today's lesson is about the causes of the Civil War. Now, this lesson can be very challenging to teach, and it can also be very challenging to learn because there are some very serious issues that happened in this country during the period of slavery that will lead to war eventually. So as I teach this lesson, I'm going to be very mindful about how the information is presented because it is factual information that we do need to learn about and that we do need to know. But again, our focus is not necessarily on ourselves. It is focusing on what happened in America during this time where there was conflict between the states and the federal government. So let's get started. Building America's economy. Well, we know that America has different ways to make money. The people work, but there's different ways to make money. In the North, the system that was used was called free labor. Now, don't get it twisted. Free labor does not mean you're working for free. Free labor means that people have the freedom to choose their own type of jobs. And if you work, you got to be paid. That's called free labor. And it was mostly used in the North and it was also used in the West. Now, in the South, the way that the South built their economy, the way they made money, was mostly through slave labor. Now, with slave labor, that means people were used as slaves. So we have African people or people of African descent were enslaved and then forced to work against their will. They did not receive pay. And this was very problematic in the South because you're pretty much human trafficking people and forcing them to work without any pay and without benefits. But this is the way that the country made their money, through slave labor and also through free labor. Eli Whitney and the cotton gin. Well, there's a man, his name is Eli Whitney. He is an inventor. He creates this machine that is called the cotton gin. The cotton gin was very important because it was a way to help clean the cotton. See, cotton, when it's grown, it's a plant, you know. When it grows, it has thistles in it, it has thorns in it, it has debris, dirt in it, and it has to be cleaned. Well, it would take an enslaved person so much time to clean that cotton by hand. I mean, just by hand, it just took so long that this man Eli Whitney, he invented this machine that actually cleaned the cotton a lot faster. Now, this machine has consequences because during this time in history in 1792, right before that time, slavery was going down. People thought that slavery was just going to fade away and slavery was going down. But because of this machine can clean the cotton so fast, a lot of people in the South started buying more slaves. Because if you have more slaves and you buy these machines that can clean the cotton faster, and cotton was a major resource that was used in the South to make money. So the price of slaves, they're going to double overnight because people in the Northeast, people in England, they want the cotton. They want to use cotton in those textile mills, those to make fabric, and that's how you would get clothing, different materials, fabrics. So Eli Whitney, he invents this cotton machine. It decreases the labor somewhat for the slaves, but it also made the price of slaves go up, and it enticed more people from the South to buy more slaves. So cause and effect relationship, but also negative consequences. Now, with the idea of having more slaves, the people in the South came to a problem. They came to a problem in the year 1808 because the government of the United States said it was now illegal to go over to Africa to buy slaves. If you remember the triangular slave trade, also known as the transatlantic slave trade, um, Black people were bought and sold for rifles, for rums. Rum is a kind of alcohol that was uh, drank by adults. So people were being traded, human trafficking, where Africans were selling other Africans as well as Europeans selling Africans. Well, when the slave trade was banned, this transatlantic slave trade, and you see the picture in the top right hand corner, the Southern slave owners had to find a new way to get more slaves. And the way that they did that was by breeding slaves. Um, a person was who was a slave, who was enslaved, did not have any rights or any control of their own body. So their owner could tell this woman, you're going to have a baby with that man, and then your child will be my property. Your child belongs to me. So slaves could be bought and they could be sold and separated from their families at any given time and for any given reason. And because you cannot go to Africa and get more slaves, then the owners would make the slave women have children by other men. Well, it was illegal for slaves to get married. That was against the law in the United States. If you were an enslaved person, you did not have any rights. But the slave owner, some of them allowed the slaves to what is called jump the broom. Jumping the broom is something that people of African descent did to signify that they were committed to their partner, that they were married. But this was not legal in the United States. Um, you'd have to get permission to marry, and if your owner said no, you can't do it, I don't allow it, then some enslaved people would do it in secret. They would jump the broom anyway. So you see on the picture on the left, it shows how the slaves would jump the broom, but also in today, you will find in society African Americans jumping a broom. I, for one, when I got married, my husband and I, we jumped the broom. We had the traditional African wedding. So you have people who will quote unquote get married, but remember, letting a person quote unquote get married was not necessarily just to benefit the enslaved person. It was a way that the owners could kind of pacify enslaved people. But remember, any child that is had from jumping the broom, any child can be sold. Mother could be sold, father could be sold, anybody could be sold. No one was safe. Not being safe creates a very unsettling situation for enslaved people. So a lot of slaves use what is called acts of civil disobedience. That means you're doing something that is against the law. Well, some enslaved people, they would break the machines that belong to their owners. They would break them on purpose. Some slaves, they just ran away and try to get away from the plantation and get away from their owners. And then you had some slaves, they actually attacked their owners and killed their owners, even their owner's family. We're going to talk about a few situations to show how slaves resisted, because not all slaves just said, oh, okay, I'm just going to be a slave for the rest of my life. No, some people are like, I'm not doing this. I wasn't born a slave. I was born free in Africa. So I'm not going to just allow my life to be destroyed through slavery. So you had a lot of different reactions on how to handle enslavement. There was one enslaved person, his name is Nat Turner, And there's a situation in history, it's called Nat Turner's Rebellion. Well, let me tell you a little bit about Nat. Nat was a religious leader, and he learned to read. He was a slave, but he learned to read. And his owner would ring him out to other plantations so that he could talk to the other enslaved people and tell them that, you need to do your work and you need to be good for your master. And once you die, you might have a better life when you get to heaven, but pretty much don't cause any problems right here and right now for your owner. Well, when Nat Turner started reading information in the Bible, he also found out about the Jewish people and how they were once slaves in Egypt. Egypt is a country in Africa. And he learned about how God in the Bible told the Egyptians to let the Jewish people go free. That was a part of the information that was not being taught, though, to Nat Turner or taught in the church, because slaves were allowed to have church because the owners thought it would make them act better, maybe be more peaceful. So Nat Turner, he didn't like this idea that being in captivity, and he didn't like the idea that the Bible was being used to tell slaves to just be good slaves to their master. So Nat Turner, he began to talk to other enslaved men, and a group of them gathered, and they began to go. They escaped, and they went to other owners, plantation owners, and began to kill families, killed women, children, the husbands, wives, just killed a lot of people. Now, this was very alarming for slave owners. So they began to make more laws that would restrict the movement of Black people, try to control their activities, because a lot of the slave owners now were afraid. They were frightened that Nat Turner and his men could come and attack them and kill them. So unfortunately, even Black people who didn't have anything to do with Nat Turner and the rebellion, some enslaved people were killed. Nat Turner was also killed, but it was to make an example out of Nat Turner by killing other people who may have and may have not been involved in the rebellion, to say, you cannot do this. You have to know your place. The law says you are my property, and so you can't rebel. You have to do what you're told. And so by seeing Nat Turner get killed and seeing other innocent people being killed, a lot of enslaved people became very frightened, very fearful, because their life could be taken at any given time. So Nat Turner, his rebellion is an example of how enslaved people led uprising against their owners in retaliation for enslavement and the cruel treatment during slavery. Now, as I said, some people, they sabotage their owner's property by breaking the tools or the machines. Some slaves led uprising, and a lot of slaves, they ran away. Now, one of the ways that you can get some assistance, but if you were a slave trying to get to the north, is by using the Underground Railroad. Now, the Underground Railroad is not a machine. It is not under the ground. It is actually a system. It was a secret system, a network of houses that was created to help slaves escape out of the South and get to the North where they could be free. It was called the Underground Railroad. Now, this was totally illegal. The United States government said it was illegal to help a slave escape. If you were a white person, you were caught helping a slave escape, you going to jail. And you're going to get charged a heavy fine. They're going to take money away from you, maybe take your property away from you. But there were a lot of white people who were willing to risk everything by helping Black people escape, helping enslaved people reach the North. These people who wanted to end slavery were called abolitionists. Now, abolitionists could be a Black person, could be a white person as well. But each, if you look at that map, each of those red markers shows a place where, let's say, an enslaved African, if you make it to that point, there will be help available for you through this system called the Underground Railroad. You would go from location to location, and once you get there, the owner would hide you, would give you food to eat. Maybe if you needed clothes to wear, they would give you clothing to wear, and then you have to hide like until it was safe to travel again. So you may stay there a couple of days, and then you will be off to the next point, trying to escape capture. Now, Harriet Tubman, she was a conductor. A conductor is a person who is a leader. So Harriet Tubman, she will help many slaves escape. At one time, I believe the government offered a $20,000 reward for her capture, but she never got caught. And Harriet Tubman, she was considered one of the greatest conductors, if not the greatest, for the Underground Railroad. Again, it's a secret network of houses, and it's used to help, and not just houses, but buildings and organizations and groups that would help Black people escape from the South and reach the North for freedom. To continue, I need to tell you about this word sectionalism. Sectionalism means to be loyal to only part of the nation, but not to the whole country. If you look at the word sectionalism, you'll see the first part is section. So think of the United States being divided into three sections. You have the North, the South, and the West. So sectionalism is about being loyal, but only to your group. There's going to be some conflict in the West, and the issue is about slavery. With the idea of sectionalism, each section of the United States was just focused on being loyal to themselves. They all made money in different ways. The North was more industrial, factories, machines, textile, but the South was more agricultural. They used cash crops, enslaved people to make money. And the West, you had farming, you had ranching. But people in the North and South, they began to have major conflict about slavery. The people in the North, they did not want slavery in the West because they thought that it would create an unfair economic situation. Now, remember, with slave labor, you don't pay the people that you enslaved. They're forced to work for free. But then you have free labor, which was used in the North, and you would have to pay a Black person if they worked for you. So the people in the North, they don't want slave labor in the West because they figure they're going to lose a lot of money. Now, people in the South, they supported slavery in the West. It says, yes, we need to have slavery in the West because that is going to give us more power. It's going to give us more representative in Congress. Now, if you go back to Unit 5, you may remember something called the Great Compromise and the Three-Fifth Compromise. It is how our House of Representatives and our Senate is set up. The more people you have, then the more representatives you get in the House of Representatives. And then once you become a state, you can have 2 senators for each state. So the South is looking at this from a political and an economical point of view, that it can be very advantageous for them to have slavery in the West. Okay? So the problem between the North and the South is over slavery being put into the West. They have some disagreements. The Missouri Compromise line of 1820. The government cannot have the North and the South arguing back and forth about slavery in the West. The government's job is to help solve problems. So to solve the problem between the North and the South and expanding slavery in the West, the government came up with an agreement. It was called the Missouri Compromise of 1820. So think of it as this way. When you look at the land in the West, the government just drew a line, just drew a horizontal line to divide the West. Anything that was above the line, any state that could be formed, and if it were above the line, then you could not have slaves. It was an anti-slavery area. But any territory below the line, if they formed a state, then they could have slavery. So above the line, no slavery. Below the line, yes, you can have slavery. Okay, this was the agreement. It's called the Missouri Compromise line of 1820. But here's the problem. There's a state called Missouri that has already been established, and Missouri is above the line, but they also have slavery. Now, this creates a problem because remember, anything above the line, you're not supposed to have slaves. Well, the government wanted to show that they're going to try to be fair, so they compromised. Compromise means you don't get everything you want, but you get some of what you want. So the government said, we see that the state of Missouri is above the line, but we're going to let you keep your slaves. You can have slave labor. You can have slavery, even though you are above the line, because we're trying to show that we're trying to work things out. But then the government also said, we need to have a pattern of how we add states into our union. So we need a pattern. If we have a free state, then we got to add a slave state. We got to do it at the same time. So because of Missouri was being added, the small state, you'll see it in the northeast area, the state of Maine was added also at the same time that Missouri was added. Okay, so this agreement kind of kept the peace between the North and the South about how they were going to move forward into the West when it comes to slavery. The Missouri Compromise of 1820, though, that was just a band-aid. It did not solve the issue of slavery in America. It just kind of pacified the situation. But slavery was still a major issue that needed to be resolved. The man who came up with this idea, called the Missouri Compromise, was a man named Henry Clay. Henry Clay is known as the Great Compromiser. So because of his actions, it kept America out of a war of fighting with themselves, the North and the South, because a deal was made, and that was the Missouri Compromise. Now, before I move on, I have to check your knowledge. This is an event. It's an event about a valuable mineral that was discovered in the foothills of a certain state on the West Coast. And in 1849, you're going to have a lot of people coming over into this area because a precious mineral was discovered, and the people who arrived were called the 49ers. Do you remember this situation? If not, you're going to have to go back and review Unit 7. Well, this was called the California Gold Rush. Okay, so put California in your mind, tuck it in and back, because I'm going to come right back to it. Now, the second question I have for you, if you know this document was a way to explain how a territory could become a state and be added to the Union. I'm going to give you a clue. All you needed was 60,000 people. If you had 60,000 people, then you could do the paperwork and you could become a state. If you're looking at the pictures, the answer is right there, but you got to know the clues. If you don't, you got to go back to Unit 7 and do a review. Well, this document that explained the way to become a state in an orderly manner was called the Northwest Ordinance, and that was done in 1787. All right, so now I want to move forward. Remember, you're supposed to be keeping California in your mind, and you're supposed to be keeping the Northwest Ordinance in your mind. Because now we have a problem. We have a problem with the state of California. If you look at the picture in the top left-hand corner, you're going to see there is something that's not quite right. Remember, we have the Missouri Compromise line of 1820. Anything above the line is supposed to be anti-slavery. Can't have slaves in that area. Anything below the line supposed to be pro-slavery. You can have slaves in that area. But what's the deal with California? If you said California is above and below the line, I like the way your brain works. The issue is California is above and below the Missouri Compromise line of 1820. Now, people in the North, they said California needs to be a free state. But people in the South said, California, that needs to be a slave state. Well, the Missouri Compromise doesn't work anymore. The government have to figure out what to do because there's arguments in Congress about California, what to do. They got 60,000 people, more than 60,000 people, because a lot of people went to California during the gold rush hoping to strike it rich. So now the dilemma is, if we add California to the Union, what does it become? It's a slave state or is it going to be a free state? To solve the problem, the government uses a new agreement. This agreement will be called the Missouri Compromise of 1850. Now remember the dates. The dates are important. The Missouri Compromise of 1850. It was a compromise of 1850. This agreement did two things. It's going to solve the problem between the North and the South over California. So this compromise of 1850 says that California can be a free state. We're not going to have slavery over here. We have to use free labor. Now, of course, this makes the northern states happy. But the South is like, well, what about us? That's not fair. And the government like, wait, chill. I got you. I got you. The government said, we are going to create the Fugitive Slave Law. And don't worry, because it's going to keep all the southern states happy. Now let's see. We got to learn a little bit more about the Fugitive Slave Law. How is that going to keep the southern states happy? The Missouri Compromise of 1820 was a bandage. The Compromise of 1850 was just another bandage, but it still did not solve the issue of slavery. Again, that was Henry Clay. This was his idea. So this is the second time this man has helped America avoid a war, trying to appease the North and trying to appease the South, but still not dealing with the issue of slavery in America. Let's take a look at the Compromise of 1850. Okay, so California's a free state, but the Fugitive Slave Law says that any slave that runs away and maybe go to the North where they were supposed to be free, the government says, nope, not anymore. A bounty hunter or a slave catcher can go to the North and get that slave and bring them back to the South to the owner. Well, this was the Fugitive Slave Law. It was an agreement that now if a slave run away, don't worry, it don't matter where that slave goes, you can get him and bring him back to the owner. And then the owner would pay a certain amount of money, a reward for capturing the slaves and returning the slaves. Government leaders, some of them did not like this. They didn't think that it was possible for America to have peace because people are divided. divided over the issue of slavery. Now, enslaved people, they began to worry because at first, if you maybe used the Underground Railroad or you just escaped on your own and you got to the north, like where New York was at, Pennsylvania, Vermont, in that area, then you could be free. But now you have bounty hunters tracking you and trying to grab you and bring you back to the South. Black people didn't feel safe, especially when bounty hunters start just kidnapping any black person and say, you must be a slave. Because remember, if the bounty hunter captures a person and turns them in to the South, well, to law enforcement in the South, you're going to get paid. You get money for that. It was a profit. So now even black people who had their freedom paper, they could have their freedom papers taken away from them, ripped up, thrown away. And it's like, now you don't have any proof. You really a slave. So I could take you and I'm going to turn you in and get money. So black people was like, gosh, we got to do something. What this is human trafficking. What can we do? A lot of black people decided it's just not safe to stay in the United States anymore. Let's leave. We can't stay here. We're not safe, not even in the North, even if we do escape the South. So a lot of black people started going to Canada. Now, Canada at this time was considered like a colony of Britain. And so if the slaves went into Canada and then the United States sent maybe soldiers or bounty hunters into Canada to try to get those people, well, this could cause an international war. It could cause a problem because Great Britain, they had ended slavery way before the United States did. There wasn't a war between the United States and Great Britain over slavery. And so if you got to Canada, then it's like you were safer than you were if you would have stayed in the United States. There's a lady, her name is Harriet Beecher Stowe. She's an abolitionist. She does not like slavery. She wrote a book and it's called Uncle Tom's Cabin. Now, in this book, she was protesting against the cruelty, the inhumanity, the brutality of the Fugitive Slave Law. She's like, that's not right. It's not right what the government is doing. It's kidnapping, it's human trafficking, and that's not okay. So, because of her book, she began to educate other white people who lived in the North about the brutality of slavery. She just put all the history on blast on how black people were being treated and how the fugitive slave law, in her opinion, was not fair. It wasn't right. So she did something about it. She wrote this book, and a lot of people who read her book, they kind of changed their mind about slavery and wanted to help. And so a lot of people will be convinced to become abolitionists because of her book called Uncle Tom's Cabin, which is still available. You can find that on the library, probably even online. It's called Uncle Tom's Cabin. The Kansas Nebraska Act. The Kansas Nebraska Act was legislation. It was a way to allow people to decide if they wanted slavery in their area or not. There's a man, his name is Stephen Douglas. He wanted to become president during the same time that Abraham Lincoln was trying to become president. And he convinced the government to just let white settlers decide to vote to see if they wanted slavery in their territory or not. Well, the government listened to Stephen Douglas and the demands that a lot of the people wanted to decide for themselves and not let the government just decide for them. So the Kansas-Nebraska Act, it covers a lot of area. You see on the map all that land, all that territory in the blue? That area now was open. But remember, there was the Missouri Compromise line of 1820 that says anything above the line was supposed to be anti-slavery. You're not supposed to have slavery up there. But Stephen Douglas convinced the government that just let the people decide. They can make good decisions. Let them make the decisions for themselves. Let them use popular sovereignty where people make the laws for themselves. So the Kansas Nebraska Act, it overturns the Missouri Compromises. Again, this was just another band-aid. America could have dealt with the problem of slavery, but they did not. Just it's like having a problem, having a wound, and it just you just keep putting more and more band-aids on it, but you don't do the necessary operation or the necessary surgery to actually fix the situation. It's just getting worse. And it will get very bad, especially in Kansas. Let's see how. In the territory of Kansas, it got so violent. People were shooting and killing each other based on their votes. So if you said I'm pro-slavery, then another person said no, I'm anti-slavery. Then they shooting and killing each other. People were getting shot and killed for their decision to vote on whether or not they wanted slavery in the area of Kansas. So this area of Kansas got a really bad nickname. It was called Bleeding Kansas, where people were shot and killed just because of their decision to vote for slavery or anti-slavery. Now, John Brown, he participated in that foolishness over there at Kansas, part of Bleeding Kansas. Now, John Brown, he is an abolitionist. He was like a minister, like a pastor, a preacher man. He came up with this idea that he wanted to help black people. He wanted to help enslaved Africans. He wanted to give slaves weapons so that they can fight against the government. So John Brown came up with this idea that he was going to seize control of a U.S. armory, an arsenal. That's a place where weapons are kept in a building on a military installation. Well, John Brown want to break into the military building and steal the weapons so he can give them to black people so that they can fight the government. Well, unfortunately, he gets into the area, but his plan falls apart. Many of the enslaved people that he wanted to arm did not show up. Somebody believed that, some people say that someone told what John Brown was going to do, and his plan fell apart. He was captured, he was cornered, and a lot of his men were killed. Even his sons, he had a couple of sons that were killed during this time as well. But John Brown, he's gonna go to court. When he gets to court, he is found guilty of treason against the United States of America, and he was sentenced to death by hanging. Now, his actions, he's a white man. His action showed America that this issue about slavery is deep and it's causing a lot of problems, and we need to start looking at this more seriously. So people are trying to handle the issue of slavery, and some people are going about it in a way that was reckless. Some people were more responsible, but it's human trafficking, it's kidnapping, the brutality of slavery, and people just are reacting differently to it. And John Brown, he was just one. He said his job was to break the jawbone of the wicked, and he figured if slavery was wicked. Now let's talk about a man named Dred Scott. Dred Scott is a slave, and he was sold a couple of times and he ended up with this owner who was in the military. So when this man owned Dred Scott, he would take Dred Scott with him. So as he traveled in the military, eventually this man, he settles in Missouri, and he also lived in Iowa. Well, this man, he dies. This military guy, he dies. He was Dred Scott owner, and he left Dred Scott to his wife. Her name is Eliza Sanford. He gives Dred Scott to his wife. And Dred Scott, he jumped a broom, so he has a wife, and he has 2 daughters. Well, once the owner dies and Dred Scott is given to the wife, Eliza Sanford, Dred Scott, he tried to sue Mrs. Sanford for his freedom. Dred Scott is going to receive some financial help and support from the abolitionists because his court case will go from the state level all the way to the federal level, which is the U.S. Federal Supreme Court. So Scott said that when his owner, this is what the case was about, Scott said when his owner took him to the anti-slavery territories, like when he was up there in Iowa, that he should have been a free man. He should have been set free because he was in the North. Well, this court case, it's going to have to be decided by a judge. And that judge will be a man named Roger Taney. So let's see what happens with the court case. Dred Scott versus Sanford. This U.S. Supreme Court case, it appeared before a group of Supreme Court justices, and the Chief Justice, his name was Roger Taney. Now, Roger Taney, he was trying to explain how federal laws have more power than state laws. So basically what he said is that black people didn't have any rights that a white man had to respect. He said that slave owners had the right to take their slaves anywhere they wanted to. He said that black people were just property and they could be bought and sold at any time. And then he said that slaves were not citizens and they didn't have the right to sue. So basically what the judge is saying is, you black, your people from Africa, you were born a slave, you're going to die a slave. You never going to get your freedom in this country. You never going to be a citizen. And that's just how it is. I refuse to take a white man's property away from him. Well, this decision made a lot of people upset, especially Dred Scott and especially people in the North. Because now Chief Roger Taney is pretty much saying, forget that Missouri Compromise line. You can go anywhere you want to with your slave. You got a right to do that if you own slaves. So people, they thought that Roger Taney, he went too far. He trying to erase the line. And eventually, Dred Scott, he does get his freedom. Some abolitionists will help pay for him to get his freedom. But it created a big conflict. It's rising conflict now between people who live in the North and people who live in the South. And it's all about what's going on in the West, what to do with that area. Are we going to allow slavery? We're not going to allow slavery. Are we going to put limits? Are we going to put restrictions? What are we doing with the West? That's what's causing the problem. Again, just another Band-Aid on slavery. So the nation is really just divided. The new territory in the West, it should have united people and helped them to work together, but sectionalism is creating conflict because people only being loyal to their own group in the way that they make money. So now the year is 1860 and the election is coming. Abraham Lincoln, he wants to be president. He wants to be the 16th president of the United States. And he wants to keep America united. He wanted to be one nation. But let me tell you something about Lincoln and how he saw slavery. Now, Lincoln, he opposed the expansion of slavery in the West. He said, we can't do no slavery in the West. We're not doing that. Mm-mm. That's going to be free labor over there. We're not doing slave labor over there. But then Lincoln also said he doesn't oppose slavery that already exists in the South. He's like, I know that there's slavery in the South. I'm not bothering that. I ain't saying nothing about slavery in the South. You can keep the slaves in the South. You're just not going to bring them to the West. See, that was Lincoln's way of thinking about slavery in the West. He doesn't want it over there, but he's not going to bother the slaves and the people who have slaves in the South. So now we got to see what's going to happen with this election. As soon as the southern states found out that Lincoln won the election, it's like, forget this. No, we're done with him. We can't stand Abraham Lincoln. He always doing something. Well, Lincoln, he won, and then the Southerners, they were outraged. South Carolina, they're the first one. They seceded from the Union. You remember they tried that before with Andrew Jackson and a nullification crisis over money? Well, this one is about slavery. They will actually secede from the Union this time. The compromises, they're not working no more. And then South Carolina, they convinced 6 other states to join them. And so when they secede, it's not like they're physically getting up and leaving and going anywhere. All they're saying is that we don't respect Abraham Lincoln. We're not listening to anything that man said. We're not following none of your rules, none of your laws. You are not the boss of us. Not today, sir. So it was a very challenging time because Lincoln, he doesn't accept the secession. He's like, no, we are one nation. We're staying together. So now we got a problem that has to be fixed. Confederate. This is a vocabulary word that we have to know in order to understand the Civil War. The word Confederate means a group joined by an agreement or a treaty. Okay, so a group that is joined together. The people in the South, they have seceded. The states, they seceded, and they're making their own country, and they're calling it the Confederate States of America. And they said they don't respect Abraham Lincoln. He's not their president. They said we picking our own president. They will pick their own president, and it will be a man named Jefferson Davis. He was elected to be the president of the Confederacy. Now, Jefferson Davis, he said that the southern states, they had to secede because the North was not letting them govern their own self. The North wasn't allowing them to make rules for themselves. And the North was trying to take away their rights, trying to control them too much. And so they had to. I mean, they used some of the information from the Declaration of Independence about when a government becomes too abusive, then you have the right to overthrow them. They were thinking along those lines that they had the right to overthrow an abusive government. So they're accusing the United States government of tyranny, government abuse. And so they said, we got to form our own country, which was the Confederate States. All right. Inaugural address, that's another word that you'll need to know. It's a speech. It's a speech to inform people about like a leader's intent for an organization or for a group. Every president gives an inaugural address, and that goes way back to you talking about like Jefferson's time, President Thomas Jefferson. So it just means a speech. Every president gives an inaugural address when they are elected president and they're trying to tell the American people what's the plan. Another word you'll need to know is preserve. Preserve means to keep safe, to protect. Okay, so now we're going to put those two together, inaugural address and preserve. President Lincoln, he gives his first inaugural address. This is the first time he becomes president, and he has to tell America what's the plan. His plan is we got to stay together. We have to preserve the Union. Now, Lincoln, he reassures the South. He's like, I am not going to interfere with slavery in the South. I know that's how you make your money through slave labor. I'm not going to bother that. But he warns the South. He says, the Constitution controls our country. And it's not just an agreement. We are a union of states, not just people. We are a union of people and states. So he's saying we got to stay together. President Lincoln, he did not accept the South's secession. He said that's not okay. That's not even legal. We're not going by the Declaration of Independence. We're going by the Constitution. So President Lincoln, he said, if I have to, I will use force against the South because we're going to stay together. This was Lincoln's first inaugural address, his first speech that he made as the 16th president of the United States. Well, the South, they don't care nothing about what President Lincoln just said. They said, look, we have a new country. Don't come in this area. Don't start anything. You just have to let go control of everything, every building, every organization that's in the South. That's now part of the Confederate States of America. Now, Lincoln, he said he doesn't accept that. And there's a couple of military installations that are in the South. One specifically is a location called Fort Sumter. It's a military base. And the people there are running out of food. They're soldiers from the United States. They're running out of food. They need supplies. They need provisions. So Lincoln had decided that he was going to send supplies into the area. He didn't want to send soldiers. He's not going over there to fight. He just going to send some supplies because he said, I'm not giving up those buildings. I'm not giving up that area. That still belongs to the United States. Well, when those ships went into the area to drop off the supplies and the provision, the Confederate forces shot at those ships. And Abraham Lincoln said, that's an act of war. And I'm going to have to do something about this. So this is the official beginning of the Civil War. Now remember, the president cannot declare war. That is not the president's job. That is the job of Congress to declare war. And then once war starts, then the president is the one who controls the military. Well, the attack on Fort Sumter became the official beginning of the Civil War, and now it is on. We have come to the end of this lesson about the causes of the Civil War. It is a lot of information. You may need to go back and listen to this video and stop it and pause it and read, but it is a very important part of history. It is a very controversial part of history. And again, it may be hard for some people to really go through this information because it's hard for teachers to teach because it's a very sensitive issue. But I will encourage you to make sure that you understand the causes of the Civil War because our next unit is the actual Civil War, and that will be in 2 parts. So this concludes this lesson with Unit 8, the causes of the Civil War. I want to thank you for joining me in the urban classroom. This is where I am teaching, and hopefully you are learning about history, U.S. history, from the 13 original English colonies to settling the western frontier after the Civil War and Reconstruction. So tune in, watch the next video lesson. I want you to have a great day, and why don't you just make it a great day? We'll see you guys. Bye.